kill the music and get things going. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our WhyTry webinar today. Excited to be with you all. Very excited for the webinar that we have planned today. We've got some really fun, I think really esteemed panelists, and I think the topic matter is really applicable. Really excited to get this going. So my name's Jason Johnson. I represent the WhyTry organization. We have been hosting these webinars for about, I think we're going on 4 years now. We started doing these in 2020 as a way to stay connected, and they kind of took on a life of their own. And they've turned into this really great place where educators can show up and hear and share and exchange ideas. We always have phenomenal panelists on that bring great experience and great insight. And it's just a fun place to be. So welcome, everybody. If this is your first WhyTry webinar, we're really excited to have you. And if you've been on several of these before or any of these before, welcome back. You kind of know how it works. So here's the way we set these up. I represent the WhyTry organization. We've been around for about 20 years. We are our area of expertise is helping people teach the skills of resilience. And so resilience is usually one of the center points of discussions here, but these webinars are places to discuss pertinent topics to education and mental health. We host these on a webinar link, which means our panelists that we have on here are the only ones with live cameras and live microphones. For the rest of you, the way you can engage is in the chat. We will have a live chat on here. And so with that, I'm going to make a chat recommendation to you. If you don't mind, open up your chat box, and there's a setting I want to make sure you have set. I think it's helpful if you're willing to let people share see your comments. For people to be able to see your comments, you need to, right above where you type a message in the chat, it says to, and then there's a little drop down arrow. That should say everyone. If it only says to hosts and panelists, or if it only says one of the panelists' name, then not everybody can see your comments. So adjust that over to everyone. And then here's what I want you to do. I want everybody to type into the chat an emoji that describes how your return to this new year of school has gone so far. So give us an emoji that expresses how your return to school, assuming I'm guessing most everybody has returned.
This could get interesting, Jason. This could get interesting.
I know. This is the school psych in me that wants to process all of it. We're going to process all the feelings here. It's a safe space. And this is great emoji representation in the chat right now. Looks like everybody got their chat adjusted properly as well. So thank you. I'm seeing all the feelings. I know the feeling. I felt all of those. And you know what? Usually, like on my first day back to school, I think I felt every single one of those emojis at one point during my first day back. That never changed for me. So awesome. Thank you. Well, let's get things going. I'm going to introduce our topic, and then I'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll jump right into it. Topic for our webinar today is all about education, and specifically some ideas that I think all educators can learn from alternative education. And we are really fortunate to have some great alternative education representation rounding out the panel today. This is a group we feel fortunate to have been able to partner with several times before. In fact, for those that have been on, this is our third webinar in the last year that we've done with NAEA, and we've got some great perspectives here. So let me introduce our panelists, and then we'll jump into the conversation. First, we've got Glenn Hoffman, the former NAEA president in 2023. Glenn has a 40-year career dedicated to breaking down barriers, fostering belonging, respected leader in alternative education, but experience spans roles as teacher, special education director, leader at state and national levels, past president of both the Illinois Coalition for Education of At-Risk Youth, and the National Alternative Education Association played a key role in shaping the future, which we'll talk a little bit about, of alternative ed. Welcome, Glenn. Super excited to have you on.
Glad to be here. Absolutely.
Next, we have Dr. Mary Cullen Fraser, the National Alternative Education Association Executive Director. Mary has focuses on DEI practices, trauma-informed principles, led transformative programs in alternative education. Work is grounded in extensive research and experience aiming to support marginalized student populations through innovative educational practices. Always a joy to be around with incredible insight. Mary, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jason. Super excited for today.
And then last but not least, we have Scott McMullen, the scope director. Scott brings over 30 years of experience as an educator and administrator, with the last 13 years as the director of an alternative high school in Missouri. Scott's work at the Scope Alternative program has focused on creating a therapeutic school culture that equips students with essential life skills such as self-regulation, coping, and self-efficacy. His passion for preparing students for life beyond high school makes him a powerful advocate for the application of alternative education strategies in all education settings. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity of being able to be a part of the panel.
And then I'll introduce myself. My name is Jason Johnson. My background is I'm a school psychologist, came from the world of public ed. I worked in Utah at Alpine School District. It's the largest school district in our state. My background is in resilience. I've been published on that topic on adolescent resilience. And then I've worked for WhyTry as the director of training and research for about the last 8 years. And the opportunity to host these webinars is one of my very favorite things. So I feel very fortunate to be here. Let's kick things off. I'm wondering if I want to just go around the horn with the panelists briefly and just catch us up very briefly on what you have been working on for the last little bit, or most recently in your previous work life, what your roles have been and kind of what you've been focusing on. Let's go, let's start with Scott, or actually let's start with Glenn and then go Mary and then Scott.
Well, most recently, I retired. So at the end of the school year. So it was very interesting taking a large portion of your career and getting it ready for the next chapter. And it really was exciting to see where you're mentoring the next principal to take over the alternative school, and how do you condense it down from a place where when I first started, we helped define what the word alternative meant. And now it was an opportunity to get people ready who have already, like so many of us in these beginning days of alternative schools, really got to define what it is. And now people can build off of those shoulders like we have off of traditional ed when we were starting alternative school. So it's been an exciting time to see how this all plays.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you again for joining us. I'm excited to hear your perspective on some of the things we're going to talk about. Mary, tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and some of the things you've got in the works right now.
Yeah, so I am, Jason mentioned, the executive director with the NAEA. I have had a career in public education for the last, prior to this role, last 12, 13 years, working as a classroom teacher in special ed. I saw several North Carolina people, so I'm currently in North Carolina. So super excited. There's North Carolina reps here, but was in North Carolina, also went to Florida and have been classroom teacher, and went to administrative role and have really focused on students with behaviors, and then kind of transitioned into this alt ed setting. And so it has been a passion of mine. I did a lot of my research around my doctorate and utilized the NAEA exemplary practices, which we'll talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, at some point. And from there, had this opportunity to work with the organization. And it has been such a life-changing experience to just get to be around other like-minded educators. And I think everybody as a whole can really resonate with the fact that this community and just a community in general of like-minded educators is something that is fulfilling. So I'm just extremely happy, and it just feels like an honor to be in a space with people who, want to just continue the good work.
I love it. Thank you, Mary. And just to give a little teaser, because we're going to circle back to this, right now your hands have been kind of full prepping with your upcoming conference, correct?
Yes, so that's one thing that we take a lot of pride in our organization is our annual conference. And last year we were in Tampa. This year we'll be in Tucson, Arizona. So anybody on the West Coast, feel free to hop on over to Tucson. But we just really pride ourselves in building this space for educators to come and learn. It's a conference for alternative educators, which Glenn kind of mentioned. It's kind of funny because what does that mean sometimes? And so, lots of conversations about that, but just a space for passionate educators who work with non-traditional students and in non-traditional settings and leaders. We have a large percentage of our attendees this year that are state, building, and district level leaders. So we're really excited about that, but just a space to really create a genuine place for educators to come and continue to grow and learn. And we pride our conference strands to be research-based and really utilize a lot of data and research. And we want people, and Scott will start to talk here in a minute, but we want people like Scott to be able to come and say, hey, we have been in the trenches, we're there with you, this is what worked for us, this is what didn't. And really be able to have those authentic, genuine time where leaders can just share and grow together, because it's needed.
I love it. And I will speak boldly as a school psych that when I was working, we were supposed to be the behavior experts in the schools in our district. And I can tell you some of the best practices that I learned from that applied in all areas of education, even in traditional settings, came from quote unquote alternative educators who really have to become experts at dealing with some unique and some challenging situations. And there's some really, really great lessons that we're going to get into from that. Scott, tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and what your area of focus has been.
So being in an alternative school, obviously, just managing behaviors, discipline, changing the mindset about education is, one of the most important things. And so one of the things I'm working on is in my school district, we have 2 high schools, and you have a lot of discipline, especially after COVID. And so one of the things I'm working on is creating a steering committee in which my staff collaborates with the administrative staff in our sending high schools so that we can implement some of our academic and SEL interventions, such as MRT and WhyTry. And so that's been our biggest goal, is collaboration across different buildings instead of being an isolated school, being able to collaborate with professionals in the traditional school setting as well.
I love it. So Scott is actually, I'm going to tease what Scott's going to present on here in just a little bit, but Scott is going to be one of the presenters at the NAEA conference in October. And he's agreed to give us a little bit of a teaser sample of what he's going to present on. There's some really, really I was really impressed. We went through some stuff the other day and I was just listening to it going, I needed this as a school psych. So I'm excited for him to get to share. But to kind of set the table for this, I want to start with you, Mary. As you've prepped for this and you've shared with me a little bit about your approach to this, you've helped develop these strands that function kind of as the base focus and organization of, I guess, ideas and approaches that you're highlighting in your conference. I think I was really impressed with the model just from a pure education standpoint. I think it would set the table nicely for our discussion. If you could maybe set us up by sharing with us what those strands are and maybe how you came up with them and what those represent.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have one of the things that I love about our conference, obviously I'm a little biased, but I do love that it is specifically for alt ed, non-traditional educators, but our content is also being delivered by alt ed and non-traditional educators. And so we really try to have people who are sharing content and who are in front of other educators because they know the work. They're passionate about the work and they can say, these things have been successful. Again, these things were not. This is what worked for us. And it's not somebody who is from, no offense to vendors, they're great. WhyTry, we love them, but they're actually in the trenches and they are practitioners every single day. And so we have a majority, we keep over 80% of our breakout sessions held for those educators to lead the content. We obviously build in space for vendors because there's amazing resources that we provide as well. But when thinking about what our educators and what our leaders encounter on a daily basis, we try to kind of create buckets based off of what they encounter each day. And so our buckets fall into categories of instruction, what is day-to-day instructional practices that would be beneficial. And then we accompany that with transitions. If you work in any non-traditional setting, whether it be maybe a mental health group facility, maybe you work in an expulsion site, or maybe you work in a special ed building, fill in the blank. There are transitions to and from those settings, and or there's post-secondary transitions for our students, transitioning from elementary to middle to high, post-secondary, etc. Transitions is a bucket. We've got leadership as a bucket. We really want to pour into our building level leaders, our district, state level leaders. How do you start a program that's an ALTS program? How do you begin those? We've got lots of sessions geared around how do you create a program from the ground up? How do you start state organizations and state advocacy for your buildings? So we've got our leadership strand. We've got behavior. That's a non-negotiable. We know in our settings, every school, whether they're traditional or not, you've got a behavior that you deal with that drives you absolutely insane. You've got behavior that drives everything. And so we have our behavior strand. We have a wellness strand this year, and we're really excited about this because it's really important to take care of ourselves as educators and leaders because if we're malnourished, then our students will also be malnourished. And so really trying to prioritize and pour into that for our educators. And then our partnerships strand is also one that we're very passionate about. We know a lot of research indicates that our students require wraparound services, and this partnership strand really helps bring in all of the stakeholders and all the collaborators that may be in the community, maybe within the district, within the region, state even, and help create these wraparound services that we know the students in our buildings need. And there's a partnership strand specifically centered towards building those. How do we engage community members? How do we get, there's some amazing, unique things out there that people are doing where I'm like, I would have never thought of that. And so really just putting that out there for people to use, take, replicate, and just have a genuine space to get poured into. I think I hit all of the strands.
It's awesome. I tried to capture them as you were saying them. I think I got them all, threw them in the chat there. And I think it's such a cool way to consider education and our place, and then each of our day within education. I was really impressed with it. And it's interesting. I go out in a training capacity and I'm in traditional schools and alt schools, but every type throughout the country, throughout the year. And the feedback I'm getting constantly overlaps with this, particularly on the behavior side. I can tell you right now, I mean, there's people that feel, and they may not be wrong, there's people right now that feel like every student in the country right now needs a behavior plan. Like we're still trying to figure out how to act post COVID. And so I love the approach, and I really feel like our alternative educators have a leg up when it comes to this because you've been doing it for years and years. So I want to throw now, we have the unique opportunity to have some I mean, we've got decades of experience on this panel. And so one of the things I asked Scott if he could, or excuse me, Glenn, if Glenn could share with us a little bit. Glenn, I don't know how humble he'll be in representing this, but Glenn is a real expert. I think 40 years of experience, and I think kind of a unique approach. So when I heard Mary's strands, I felt like this is kind of like a formula for a connection. And the research I've done on you, Glenn, I feel like you kind of had your own Glenn Hoffman approach to connection and to support, and you've got the unique vantage of doing it at both micro and a macro level. You were a practitioner. You were also a really impressive administrator. So listening to Mary's talk about, Mary talk about that approach to strands, I'm just wondering, how would you connect that to the Glenn Hoffman approach, or could you even give us like a little summation of what the Glenn Hoffman approach to connection and this was?
It's fascinating. There was a point in time where we were in the state of Illinois with a large state conference, and I had a chance to go over to my first national conference years ago. And when I left there with their exemplary practices. And their exemplary practices were this layout of what an alternative school could look like. And these strands line up so well within those exemplary practices. But there was a point in time where I was excited about the exemplary practices because of the fact that it was letting us look at alternative education with a set of eyes that were thinking alternatively. But you bring up a good point, which is after COVID and after every group of students having been spending a year in a non-traditional environment and everybody coming back to a much more non-traditional environment, the exemplary practices are there, and they set themselves up as a rubric. And so you can even just go through your classroom and just score it. And so it's funny because one of the strands is leadership. Well, one of the first things I did with these exemplary practices was we came back into the building and I gave everybody the rubric and I just said self-score. And that was every teacher, every admin, my boss who was an elected official, parents, anybody, and even the students to talk about where did they see us line up in these exemplary practices. And it was a neat way of getting people involved, but to be thinking about the fact that we want to look at this differently than tradition. And I think everybody wants to be looking at things and almost needs to be now looking at things differently than tradition, because whatever was tradition, it just disappeared somehow. If someone would have told us we were all going to switch over to digital in some capacity and we were going to do it in 6 months, the world would have told us no way. But instead, we were able to just really dive into that. And so I think these strands are just wonderful. And I look forward to seeing people talk on behavior, because I could do an entire webinar on just behavior. We can talk about when we introduced an extra door in the back of every one of our classrooms, because we found out that our classrooms were rated to hold 20 students. Our hallways were rated to have so many hundreds, but our doorways were only rated to have 1 kid in the doorway at a time. Well, the problem is you've got 20 kids coming in and 20 kids going out. And then we're surprised why so many of the students who find themselves in alt ed are because of the fact that they can't walk, they can't eat, and they can't ride. But they do great in the classroom, is what the traditional teachers will tell us. They'll go, he does fine in the room, but he doesn't do well walking down the hallway. He doesn't do well eating in the cafeteria, and he's not so great on the bus. And here's his stack of bus reports. And so changing things up, like putting a door in the back of every of our classrooms so that we could develop a flow in and out of the room, it changed everything. And that's one silly Glennism from one school in Illinois. And yet, if you're in a building filled with hundreds of presenters, all traditionals doing it, and giving you each one of them their one little idea. Amazing what changes that can make into your classrooms. Partnerships. Partnerships is an interesting mix because you'll get people who want to volunteer in the buildings. But there's so many great partners. There's people like WhyTry, who I heard Scott say, we're using WhyTry in our building. And that's where the vendors, sometimes it's scary. You don't want to walk up to somebody because you're like, hey, I'm just a teacher. I'm not going to be able to buy this whole curriculum. But on the other hand, there's so many great ideas because they've been to so many schools. But we've also teamed up with people like local churches. And so like our local churches came over and said, what could we do? And I went, how would you feel about organizing hygiene kits for us? And so the beginning of the school year, they get together, they have a big box in front of the church, a couple churches actually. They collect everything and then they give us hygiene bags. And at the students' orientation, we give every student a bag with toothpaste, soap, deodorant, and all these other things that many of us take for granted. But here they are, and the churches love it. Every year they show on up with carloads filled with these boxes in order to share it. And it's such a simplistic thing where they wanted to help. And all we did was go, here's a methodology. And again, these are the things that I think each one of these strands can take us through for each and every one of these things. And transitions, we've got to get as good at this as possible. I came out of special education, and coming out of special education, we do a really good job at doing things like intakes and outtakes and what is going to be the conference before, so that we are doing this handoff. But in alternative ed, or even sometimes from year to year, transitions are not always what we think they are. And I even think of, I don't know if anybody has ever been to a poverty simulator, but a poverty simulator is where they have people just go through and see what it's like to try to make it to different event, to if you had to pay a bill, but you also had to go pick up your check, or you had to go over without a car to solve a problem with the gas project, the gas bill in your house. And you see how difficulty that is to be able to make it to things that we get to say, well, these services exist. And we're always pointing to the services that exist, but these poverty simulators give you an idea to find out that while they exist in your town, why they exist in your school, they don't always really exist in the real life of our students and their families. And it was a nice way of eye-opening our eyes into what do these real transitions look like? What's real for a real human being who lives this life, not just somebody on paper where we can say on our website, look, it says we cover all these things. So I think these strands are perfectly aligned with the Glenn Hoffman way. And it's really not the Glenn Hoffman way. It really is all of us who have been doing this since alternative schools were conceived. We've all been fighting our own paths to define what is the Glenn Hoffman way or the Jason Johnson way, or insert everybody else's way. But when we get together, at least once a year, we get a chance to find out a shortcut to maybe make it quicker to that way. And I think it's just an exciting way to see these strands broken apart. And it really gives you a chance to go into a conference and go, ooh, I'd like more information on this.
I love it. Perfect. That was exactly what I was looking for. I knew there was a Glenn Hoffman approach. I knew it was in there. So that sets us up really nicely. And we have kind of a unique opportunity today. We don't always get this, but we have one of the presenters who's also a current educator that's going to be presenting at this NAEA conference in October. We've got Scott McMullen with us, and I visited with Scott the other day and was really impressed. He shared with Mary and I a little bit about his his presentation, and parts of it kind of blew my mind. And what I found, I think Scott represents the best and brightest of not just NAEA, but educators in general. Scott's a humble individual that has, I think, a pretty incredible story. And so we have the time slotted. I want to be able to hear from Scott a little bit. So Scott, what I think you've agreed to do is share a little bit about your background, kind of what got you to this point of where you're at now. And then also Scott's agreed to share kind of an overview and some insight from his presentation. And Glenn, by the way, you talked about behavior. Have I got a treat for you? Because this thing Scott has, I think, is a really remarkable piece in the behavioral puzzle, amongst other things. So Scott, I'd love to turn the time over to you and have you share just a little bit about your background, kind of where you came from, what got you here, and then tell us what you can about this presentation you're going to be making, because there's some great tools for all educators there.
Thank you so much, Jason, for your kind words. It's a pleasure being able to serve with everyone today. A little bit about myself. I represent a lot of my students. I grew up in a very traumatic childhood. I grew up in a drug house, grew up in a house where there were thousands of dollars worth of drugs, but no food. I remember as an elementary student coming home from school and our apartment filled with strangers who were either buying drugs, selling drugs, or getting high. So a lot of trauma that my sister and I endured. But one of the biggest takeaways, and it helped shape me as an educator, is the importance of creating a safe space, whether as a classroom teacher and now as the director of an alternative school. Also, the importance of positive relationships, because without those things, I would have probably wound up being a statistic or continuing the generational cycle of, poverty and in and out of prison, like my father exhibited throughout my childhood. I'm excited that I get a chance to work with at-risk students because it gives me an opportunity to give back. I had positive people in my life along the way, critical points that taught me and exposed me to a different world. And so that's why I'm so thankful that I'm able to present at the national conference in Tucson. When I talk about self-regulation, it's extremely important. And using moral recognition training, MRT, that's been the basis of what my presentation will be. And I'm going to give you a little snippet of how that's applied, how it's impacted the lives of other students. And I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit of that with you now.
By the way, Scott, I got that video you shared. So whenever I have it queued up, if you want me to share it, just give me the green light whenever you want me to.
Okay, perfect. So just a background. When I first took over as an alt school director in my first school district, we were saddled with having over 2,500 student absences because of long-term suspensions. Not only did we find out that once these students were long-term suspended, they didn't go to our alternative school because it was violent. The school environment was, not conducive for learning. So a lot of negativity surrounding that. So I knew going into it that I needed to have some type of SEL intervention in place. Just a background of some of my students, the reason they were referred to my alt school was violence and bullying, chronic class disruptions, drug-related offenses. So those are some of the big three. So going into it, I was familiar with PBIS. So in the off season, before my first year, I met with my staff. We did training on PBIS, and it was only minimally effective. And so after year two, our staff was like, well, we need to have something else because it's really not moving the needle. This is what my behavior incidences look like. So my first year, I did a data sampling of the previous 5 years. And so the school I inherited had over 1,400 disciplinary referrals per year. Not only were they due to class disruptions, but there were physical and verbal altercations almost every day, lack of student engagement. So after year one of PBIS, we went from around 1,500 to around 1,400 referrals. So we ended up thinking, what can we do better? What's something that can be individualized? Because when you're in an alternative school setting, it's not the whole school that has the behavior issues. You find out it's those tier threes. It's that 5 to 10%, 10 to 20 students that you really need to have something in place to meet their individual needs. And so that's where MRT came into the format. Through collaboration with the juvenile justice system and also with mental health professionals, I found out about MRT, and it was based out of Memphis. It was implemented in prisons in the 1980s, and it had a really high success rate. So basically, MRT is a sequence of 12 interactive lessons. It's a restorative and preventative practice based on self-reflection, goal setting. An MRT lesson starts off with a reading passage, 2 to 3 pages that's related to the art activity at the end of each session. Then after the art activity is used as a graphic organizer. So a student will write a summary based on their graphic organizer, and then they would give a oral presentation afterwards. And then after that oral presentation, they would give a testimonial in front of their peers in their MRT group. And then those peers would give feedback on whether that student was being honest, if they felt that they were making a concerted effort to improve their behaviors. So this is what a sample lesson would look like. This student was long-term suspended from my school from our sending high school because she sold drugs to a classmate. That classmate in class ended up taking the drugs, had an allergic reaction, lost consciousness, and so emergency personnel had to be summoned to the school to help that student out. So our school district decided, okay, we're going to long-term suspend this student. And one of the contingencies was that, okay, if the student did MRT, they could attend graduation, and they also could attend prom, because this was their senior year when this happened. And so the first lesson that we talked about was this student talked about, okay, I sold drugs in class. And then we talked about, in this pyramid of the present, what did you do 1 to 3 months ago that led you to selling drugs? And this student was very candid. She shared that I met this guy, we started dating exclusively, and he partied and he did drugs all the time. Then we talked about, okay, well, what did you do 3 to 6 months ago that led to this incident and then this incident ultimately? And she said that I met this young man, we started dating, I knew that he partied all the time, so that's what led me to dating with him steadily. It also contributed to me developing an addiction to ecstasy, and so I had to sell drugs to support my habit. So then we talked about, well, okay, well, what did you do 6 to 12 months ago? Or what happened in your life during that time period that led you to dating this guy, getting addicted to drugs, selling drugs in class? And she said, well, my family, we are a family of kickboxers. We own a gym. We had a lot of family activities. And as you can see in this picture, I'm frowning. This is a picture of my dad asking me to do family functions, and I declined. And so this is what led me to this negative relationships as opposed to the positive ones that I had. So then on the other part, what could have been, it talks about, well, instead of dating this guy exclusively, what could you have done? She said I should not have dated him exclusively. That probably would have prevented me from getting high with him all the time and becoming an addict. Then what could you have done 3 to 6 months ago? Well, I should have walked away and not dated him at all. And then 6 to 12 months ago, what could you have done? And she wrote that I could have continued to do family functions. I could have been more involved and engaged in positive things as opposed to negative ones. So that was the first lesson. And the powerful part of it was not only the lesson, but after students would give a testimonial, they would end up meeting and talking with their group, and then they would brainstorm of positive things that they could do instead of the negatives. And as you can tell, when I go back to my discipline, this is what my discipline looked like. So it gradually decreased from 1,500 a year almost to my last year of 276. After year 4, I took a job in St. Louis. It was a better opportunity for my family and myself. And as you can tell, as soon as I left, this is what the discipline looked like after I left. So the replacement principal stopped doing MRT. At the end of the year, they were back up to almost 1,000 referrals. Not only just 1,000 referrals, but the violence, the bullying, those behaviors started creeping back in. So then after 1 year, that principal ended up leaving. It was a very daunting task for them. And so the replacement principal, she lasted 9 months. By November, she was already up to almost 700 discipline referrals. So it was such a strong cause and effect relationship. So at my second school that I went to, we averaged nearly 400 referrals per year, 16 fights a year, 11 incidences of bullying, and then I think there were 9 incidences of assaults. And as you can see, I like to do 3-year snapshots of my data. I implemented MRT in my school setting, targeting those tier 3 students, tier 2 students who needed an individualized behavior plan that was interactive. And as you can tell, my snapshots, I went from 400 almost to around 133. And then the previous 3 years, we averaged 33 referrals. We've not had a fight or an assault in 6 years. Last year, we had 21 discipline referrals, and we service over 200 students per year on average. So it just shows you the strength and the power of MRT, actually. So that was the first lesson she did. The second lesson is the wheel of life. And it talks about things that the student really struggles with and also strengths as well. So draw a picture that represents the biggest area in your life. She talked about she's always late for things. So she draws a picture of get over grandpa. She's trying to speed to get to class. This other one, the second drawing, the biggest obstacle in your life. She needed more money, even though she worked, 20 hours a week to supply her drug habit. She ended up having to sell drugs as supplemental to her income. So this is a snippet of some of the lessons that that we teach during our MRT sessions, and that'll be a big basis of my presentation in Tucson of not only walking through the life of a student that goes through MRT. So I'm going to give you a sample of 4 or 5 different lessons, and then what it would look like if you were to implement it in your school. Any questions before I move on to the next phase? I also have testimonials from students who have also been through the program. Jason, do you mind sharing that video by chance?
Yep, I've got it ready. Here goes.
And someone mentioned the name of the pyramid is called the Pyramid of the Present.
All right. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, here you go.
And the reason why I got put in MRT was because back in 7th grade, I had 31 discipline refers. I got into many fights, and I just thought that, I was hanging around the wrong crowd of people, and I thought that I was untouchable, unstoppable, and I just thought that I could do what I want, when I want, and didn't have to answer nobody. And when I first started MRT, I thought, this is going to be a waste of my time, and that why am I getting put through this when it ain't going to help me? Well, MRT actually let me set goals for myself that I knew that didn't think was going to be attainable at then, but it let me know that, yes, I can do whatever I want if I set a goal for it. I set a goal for graduating high school, which I did. I set a goal for me having a great job, which I have. And I had great mentors and great students and great teachers along the way that helped me through it. I had a couple hiccups when I was with it, but I learned to overcome those goals, and I think that's what making me a better person than I am today. And I hope and pray that they put this program in the schools, because not only is it's not mainly for drug or alcohol abuse, stuff like that. It can be for troubled teens that has fighting problems, anger management problems, or problems along those lines. Because all it takes is somebody to listen to you And that's exactly what I thought. There was nobody that was listening to me or anything. But when I got put through this program, there was, and it showed me that yes, there's people out here that will help you. Even though you don't think that they will. And I just think this program was really good, and I hope that it gets put into schools.
So MRT has really made an impact on a lot of the lives of the students. I still keep in contact with those students even 10 years after they've completed the program, and they are all doing well. So part of my presentation is going to be very interactive. So I'm going to have a scenario in which there's a behavior incident, and then I'm going to have people in my breakout session be in collaborative teams, and they're going to brainstorm what they may have in place in their own schools to address those issues, how they would target those behaviors, and then we would share out. And then I would also share, okay, well, this is what actually happened in my building. This is the outcome for that student. The thing about MRT is it is a copyrighted program. So the workbooks and supplies or resources, you have to be trained on it to be able to implement it. But the great thing about it is they have fidelity meetings once a month that helps you implement it, within your school setting. So I would have interactive scenarios. Then I also would walk you through what MRT looks like. And then to conclude things, talk about how it impacts behavior overall in the school setting.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. Looks like you got a couple questions in there. While you're prepping to respond to those, I was scrolling down notes during that, and I wrote down art, expression, connection, goals, and then I got goosebumps when the student talked about just having somebody listen to him at the end. And I thought there's such a nice overlap, and that it's such a simple critical piece, but it has connections to restorative practices. It has connections to trauma-informed models. Quite frankly, it has a connection to the WhyTry approach that we teach. Scott, before you respond to some of those questions, I'm just curious, Mary or Glenn, what were your reaction witnessing that approach?
I'll be honest with you, Jason. It was one of these programs that I'm just so excited to hear about. There's been so many different approaches, and I think the big key is always that listening and that being part of connecting with the students. And truly, when you look at any of the programs that we've seen, and so many that have been greatly effective like this one, if you take away anything from them, even if you don't end up going through the training, it's a matter of going, it's that I was listening to the student, we were hearing what they had to say, but we were also identifying how we can help through data. Who were the kids who, everybody needs us, but sometimes some of us need even more, and how do we make that connection with that student ahead of time, rather than constantly dealing with it afterwards. If you're spending your whole career putting out fires, you need something, because you need some way of realizing that if you're waiting to put it out, it's already probably too late for most of them.
Absolutely. I love that. Any thoughts, Mary?
Yeah, I think, Glenn, you mentioned this in one of your previous responses, but it sounds so much too about creating safe spaces. When we talk about having those safe spaces for our kids. And so it sounds like Scott has found this resource that helps him do that. And, there's fill in the blank. There's so many different resources, but what I think I pull away from that is these students felt safe. And that's a physical component, of course, but then there's a step further and a little bit deeper than that of how do we emotionally create safety for our students? And, it takes emotional safety for a student to be like, well, I have an ecstasy addiction, and this started because of a relationship. There's some vulnerability and there's some bravery that comes with that, to where, you have to really be able to cultivate a space. I'm sure Scott didn't just walk in on day one and say, all right, kids, let's fill out this form. And they just started talking about their drug habits. I'm sure there are some steps that went to that, and really cultivating this space, and, being a person that is physically creating that safety, but then also emotionally really engaging in that and working on that. And I think that takes a lot from us as adults, educators, and leaders. And that was something that I just resonated with me. And I applaud, your team, Scott, because I think that it's not an easy feat to really work and intentionally create those emotional, safe environments too.
I wrote a similar thing. I was writing down the formula. I'm always trying to figure out the formula for whatever reason. And in the formula, I have just circled the name Scott. And obviously part of the magic is I think Scott is uniquely good at connection and helping people feel safe. So that's part of it. But then it's certainly a good program can always help enhance whatever talents you already have. But I agree that connection, that safety, and I think Scott's masterful at that. And I appreciate you mentioning, Glenn, as well, that some of those takeaways are universal regardless of what program you're going to build on top of that. Scott, for the next couple minutes before we pivot over to final thoughts and wrapping things up, do you want to respond to any of the comments that were made or any of the questions? I know there was a question about what happens if a student refuses to participate, or how many staff does it take to run?
Good question. So in the case of the student that I gave you that sold the drugs in class, it was either you do the program or you wouldn't be able to do graduation, or you wouldn't be able to go to prom. And it's really interesting because the student ended up getting the referral in October. She ended up graduating early in December, but because MRT was making such a positive impact in her life, she asked, "Hey, Dr. Welker graduated me early. I still want to come in to do MRT because it's helping me. I feel the best I felt about myself in a long time." That sense of self-efficacy. So she still came to our MRT sessions on Tuesday and Thursdays. It was an hour session each day. And she went through March and she finished. And it's interesting, she elected not to go to prom. She did go to graduation because it was the intrinsic goal that was more important than the extrinsic, because the MRT program really hit to the core of what she struggled with, and it was relationships. And throughout the themes of me doing MRT, the students talked about getting away from negative relationships and getting into positive ones, replacing negative behaviors with positive behaviors. And so just that reflection, self-awareness, those types of things are just so powerful. And so once students started becoming successful, then it really wasn't much of a challenge to get them to keep coming back.
That's awesome. There's a few more questions. I'm going to recommend, in the interest of time, if you have questions, we're going to put up our panelists' email addresses in a little bit. And if you have follow-up questions, you'll be able to email Scott directly. I think there's another email address there that was listed from Wendy as well that you can direct questions to. One thing I did want to mention, I'm going to go ahead and just respond to this because this is a question I get pretty regularly, and it hits right at the core of the WhyTry approach. So the question was asked, or the comment was made, like, part of the magic is continually in the face of changing staff. How do we address this? I mean, this is an entire webinar. I can't fully do justice to it, but I have an initial thought because this comes up regularly in almost every training that I do. The heartbeat of the WhyTry approach, I think the heartbeat of MRT, I think the heartbeat of good alternative education and education in general typically lies in connection. When students feel different around us, they respond different to us. We have this natural challenge right now where turnover in education is high. The environment has become extremely stressful. It's become politicized. It's become hostile in certain situations, and it is hard to hold on to educators. Educators move around, and so that transition can create difficulty. My brief response.
I don't know what happened, but it just cut off, Jason. We can't hear you. We hear nothing. It just drastically cut off, unless it's just me. It's not just
No,
me.
I can't hear either.
Okay. Nope.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me now?
Now we got it.
Boy, talk about having to be resilient. I just gave the greatest answer of my life. You missed it. Here's what I'm going to summarize. The question was asked, how do we address this changing faces? And it really is an important question because education is a tough environment right now. There's turnover, there's changes that happen, and we know connections at the core. The WhyTry approach, and something that I'm very passionate about, and maybe we'll need to explore this down the road in another webinar, because I think it really is an important question. In its simplest form, one of the things we teach a model called surrendering the one up. It's kind of the heartbeat of the WhyTry approach to connection. In its simplest form, it's about being very intentional and trying to communicate and connect, but specifically communicate value to students as quickly as possible within whatever environment we step in. So if I step in as a new school psych, my number one priority probably should be, how do I connect with each individual kiddo as quickly as possible that I'm going to be working with? And there's some simple strategies you can apply. Then there's some big picture macro approaches. But I wanted to at least acknowledge that question because it does lie at the core, and the connection, I think, lies at the core of the solution, or the attempt at the solution in that. Scott, I want to give you final say on anything else you wanted to add on the MRT piece or the connection piece, or anything Mary or Glenn mentioned.
I would like to respond. I think I had a couple of questions. Why do you think MRT was not engaged by your replacement? I think that person wanted to kind of carve their own path. It does take, if you don't have the background training, it can take, effort. And I don't want to be disparaging, but that person had a different philosophy on education. And so they did not have the value as far as those interventions that me and my staff had at that time. So I think that's the big reason why, is just a different philosophical aspect of SEL and the importance of implementing that. Someone also said, can you apply this in a program to elementary students? Yes, there is a workbook that is written on an elementary, middle school grade level. The same foundation and premise applies, but it's written on a less rigorous content level. So it can be implemented at a lower grade level. And then staffing. It depends on how many students that you need, depending on your program. You want to have an MRT group having no more than 4 to 8 people. You probably want to have 2 sessions per cohort group. So it really depends on student need. But I would suggest having more than 2 or 3 people trained on it. That way you can do some co-teaching as you start scaling the intervention to more people.
Thank you. Thank you for responding to those. Hey, we're about out of time, so I have 2 last things before we finish up. First, Mary, tell the people that may be interested, how can they learn more about the conference that's upcoming? Feel free to throw that link in the chat again if you'd like, but give us the details on it.
Yeah, I will definitely repost the link again so that it's fresh on everybody's chat. But we will be October 7th through 9th. We will be in Tucson, Arizona at the Westin La Paloma. And we currently have, we're hovering right at 500 attendees. We will have registration open up until day 1. And so we anticipate, last year in Tampa, we had about 650 alternative, non-traditional educators and leaders. And so we are expecting in the 600s again this year. And so we are super excited about just being able to, we've got 2 really amazing keynote speakers. One of them is going to give us some research-based content as a practitioner in the field. And then another one is also a practitioner, but he's got a little bit more of a lighthearted message that he's going to bring and just kind of pour into our educators and leaders we want to take care of our educators. We want to take care of our leaders. And so this time in this conference is where we get to dote on you all and give this space for all of the research to come out. Let's exchange information. Let's share. Let's see what's working. And we get to really pour into and fill the cups of our educators because you guys are doing incredible work. And it's hard work, but we know that when we pour into you guys, you take those full cups and you pour into students. And so the end game is to take care of our kiddos because that's why we're doing this. And so we are accepting any registrations. We've got, I'll post the link again. You can go directly to our website. Talked about the strands a little bit. We'll have some really great vendors. We're going to bring a lot of Tucson to the resort. And it is a resort. And so it's nice to just come and you get to enjoy the conference during the day and a resort at night. So we also understand there's staffing barriers, there's funding barriers, all of that. And so we know the struggle that is coming with public education right now. So reach out if there's any way we can support your teams.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. I've got a page up with our email addresses, contact info. Mary just put the link for the conference as well as NAEA. What I like to do to conclude, I want to, by the way, this has been really, really enriching and I appreciate everything that's been shared. And it's just inspiring to me as an educator to see it all come together and see so much common ground with the things and the principles I feel passionate about. So I am curious. Here's what I want to conclude with. We'll go around the horn, give everybody a chance to respond. We're all at various stages in our career or in relation to our career. And I'm curious, what do you understand better now that you wish you would have known towards the beginning of your career, which is a big, deep question. Let's try to keep responses under like 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Let's go Glenn, and then we'll go Mary, and then we'll go Scott.
You know, I think the interesting thing there is this concept of retirement, and you hear about staff turnover and questions asked. What happens when there's a turnover? And I think we have to do better at paying attention to our retirees and how to celebrate that. We're more apt to have a party when someone's leaving to go to another job and we all go somewhere and we say goodbye, but they left us. And I think it's different to just be able to celebrate those people who have worked their way through the time, and how do we just celebrate that and inform our people. I would have liked to have done a lot more work with many of my teachers to really get them to know that they chose a career, but that's a career that they can work all the way through rather than going, well, how do I jump to something else? It's been it was something that hit me by surprise when it finally came around time, that how little I had planned and prepped for it. And I really wish I would have known more about that as a young teacher walking around just excited about the world in front of me, to know that this was part of a multi-decade process.
Great insight. Thank you, Mary.
I think I would tell myself, keep showing up. I think keep showing up each day as the purest and humblest way that you can. Show up, and it's seen by kids of all shapes, sizes. And when you show up and you show up with the best self, and sometimes your best self isn't cute. And I had no problems coming in some days saying, I might look cute, but I sure don't feel cute, y'all. And so, you know, let's figure out how we're going to make it through today. And, you know, remembering kids are human, and you have bad days too, and they're going to have bad days too. And, you know, but if we keep showing up, you know, we can cut to what really matters and help kids.
I love it. Thank you, Scott.
So for me, I wish that I would have had some of the professional development that I had later on, as far as instruction, SEL, and just being able to, you know, combine all of those to make the best learning experiences for my students as a classroom teacher, especially. I just think early on, you're in survival mode and you're trying to make a name for yourself and surviving. And I just wish that the students I had my first 2 or 3 years had the better version of myself that was after year 4, when I had gone all those experiences and also professional development. So I wish I could go back in time and be more well-rounded, or maybe be in an educational program that prepared me for PLCs and being able to read a curriculum and have all those interventions in place before I ever hit a classroom. So I wish I could be a little bit more well-versed before even entering the profession as a regular classroom teacher.
That's great insight. That's a really interesting way to view it. I'll add mine to the list. I feel really almost spoiled at the perspective I get on education now because of my role as a trainer and offering the training and the development. I get to work in so many areas now that I didn't fully get to as a practitioner. And I learned so much. And if I could go back and convince the first or second year version of me to figure out how to maybe a little more boldly like reach across the aisle and try to step into and learn from some of these other spaces that I didn't have immediate access to, whether it was alternative schools, whether it was the world of a school social worker that may feel different than the world of a school psychologist, whether it was stepping into a behavior unit or whatever those may be. We get those experiences along the way, but I think trying to seek those out, because there's so many incredible experts that operate in their own lane, in their own niche, and we don't always get to learn from them. And figuring out how to share more broadly that and me, learn more broadly that would have been a great benefit. So hey, this has been a phenomenal webinar. Thank you, everybody. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Scott, Glenn, and Mary, thank you so much. You showed up with great content and great insight. Thank you to all of our attendees. We recorded this. This will be available in video format, and then we are going to be announcing officially here within the next week a podcast format. We will have the audio available of this in podcast format for you to be able to review for any of you that would like to and share. Thank you so much for showing up. I'm going to play us out with a little bit of music.